afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another installment of Cow's Sci-Café. My name is Nadia, and I'll be your moderator for today. So I am very excited for today's event for two reasons. The first being that we're going to talk about a circular carbon economy, which is a very relevant topic at the moment. And the second is due to Saudi Arabia has recently opened its tourist visas. And my mom, Laura, is in the audience today due to that tourist visa. So I just want to say, hi, Mom. Okay, moving along swiftly. So this phrase, circular carbon economy, it's been thrown around a lot lately. It's one of the major discussion topics of the G20, which is taking place in Saudi Arabia this year. I think we are all very much aware of the negative impacts that carbon emissions are having on our environment and as well our own carbon footprint. But what exactly does this phrase mean? So when you think of a circular carbon economy, circular, I want you to think of this closed loop system. So I think all of us, or maybe most of us, are aware of reduce, reuse, recycle. Let's add another R in there. Let's add remove. So when we talk about a circular carbon economy, we're talking about reducing, reusing, recycling, and removing these carbon emissions. Now, I know I probably haven't done that enough justice, and that is why I'm joined here today by our CAUS faculty. So we're going to hear from them first, and then we're going to hear from you guys in the audience. So please do get your questions ready. Mom, you can even ask a question yourself too. This is a global issue. It should be a general discussion. It shouldn't just be up to researchers and policymakers. Everybody should have a say. So with that, just another disclaimer, we were supposed to have Professor Hussein Hotate with us today. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he couldn't make it. So I just want to thank Dr. Thomas Finkbeiner, who's joined us here today, and I'm glad that we can still keep that part of the conversation going. And for those of you watching on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, you can ask questions in the comments section. So I think, Mani, I'll get you to start us off. Maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your research, how you got to where you are, and how that research contributes to a circular carbon economy.
Okay, thank you, Nadia. Hi, Mom. And hi, Amma. My mom is also in KAUST now,
Nice.
thanks to the visa. So if I ask my mom, Mom, do you know, Amma, do you know what a circular carbon economy is? And she would say, is that some kind of car you're driving? That's not what it is. And that's not, although I'm interested in college, that's not the focus of circular carbon economy and my area of research. So I'm Mani Sarathy. I'm the Associate Professor of Chemical Engineering. I'm a member of the Clean Combustion Research Center. And my research center has this word in it, combustion. And combustion is a major source of carbon emissions globally. And the area that I try to work with, together with my colleagues, we're a center of about 150 people, try to work on the R part, so the reduce. First part is reduce as much of the carbon emission to the environment as possible. And this can be achieved by improving the efficiency of combustors, by changing the fuel, using low carbon fuels or different types of fuels which emit less CO2 emissions to the atmosphere, working on mobility, so transportation, aviation, road-going vehicles, marine sector, shipping, trying to study how these systems can be optimized to reduce the carbon emissions. In addition, because anytime you combust a carbon-based fuel, you're going to produce some carbon emission. Members of our center, we work on trying to capture that carbon and trying to capture that carbon and then do something useful, which my colleagues will talk more about. So we can get more into the details about the reduce aspects and capture aspects, but I think for now, that's a good brief introduction of what we're doing.
Thank you, Mani. Noting those words, reducing. Thomas, maybe I'll pose the same question to yourself. You can introduce yourself. Tell us about your research and about how you got to where you are and perhaps how that research maps on to a circular carbon economy.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. First of all, it's a privilege to be here. And speaking of mom, my mom will be here on Friday. When I tell her I was on TV, she'll be probably very proud. So I've been here in KAUST for 4 years, and I work in the Petroleum Center. I'm a senior research scientist. And before coming to KAUST, I've worked in the petroleum industry. And my specialty area is related to what we call geomechanics, so everything that has to do with the mechanical behavior of rocks in the subsurface, is of my interest and concern, and still is, and that's my topic also here at KAUST. So when we basically produce or put something back into the surface, we disturb the equilibrium. And that's of great importance for the carbon industry as well, because when we pump carbon back into the surface, we change the pressures in the subsurface, and something happens down there, and we need to understand if that what happens poses a great risk, or is it still safe to do so. And so in my past and also in my current work, I deal basically with how the rocks behave as a result of putting carbon back into the subsurface. So this aspect brings the remove side of things into the discussion. But also lately, and I hope we can get into that later in this discussion here today, on the geothermal side, we can reuse the carbon that we store again for maybe power generation in a very environmentally friendly aspect. So that also has to do again with the subsurface and is of concern and of interest for myself and my colleagues here in our center. So we're very much part of the carbon cycle, and we want to be part, and we want to make a difference, and also basically show the world that while the petroleum industry is often viewed as a dirty industry, we can actually do a lot in contribution to make this a much cleaner place and a better future for all of us.
Nice, thank you. A lot of R's in there.
Yes.
Kyle, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. So thank you for the introduction, and it's my pleasure to be up on stage today. I moved to KAUST 6 months ago, so I'm a relative newbie here, and unfortunately my mother is not here in the audience, so they're going to come, I swear.
Yeah, Saudi has visas now,
Yeah,
so you
exactly.
can get her over really easy.
My sister will come soon, so
That's
yeah,
great.
that's good, yeah. I work on the reuse side of carbon, and the way to think about this is that I'm much more from the biological side, and carbon makes up most of, or a large part of, all living organisms. So when we think about carbon, you and I and bacteria and the animals that we have around us, we all eat food to get that carbon into our bodies and to build our structures. But plants, cyanobacteria, and algae have evolved the capacity to take carbon from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. And that's why we call them primary producers. And so my work in my lab is called the Sustainable and Synthetic Biotechnology Lab. And we're called that because we work with largely photosynthetic organisms. So we're using these organisms to capture carbon dioxide, and then we're using the techniques of synthetic biology to change those organisms to do things that they might not naturally do, that we can then use to shift perspectives away from making consumer goods from petroleum-based products into biological-based products. So that's kind of an overview of what we do. We do a lot of work on microalgae, a little bit of work on macroalgae, and we're working largely on synthetic biology implementation in those organisms.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a lot of R's in there, and I think I even need to recap for myself. I just want to reiterate something that you said. So carbon are the building blocks of this earth. I think we really need to understand that. It isn't about getting rid of carbon entirely. It's about how we're going to reduce, reuse, recycle, remove it. So Kyle is looking at taking carbon and turning it into a completely different product. And then Thomas is looking at putting carbon back into the earth. When he's talking about the subsurface, he's physically talking about carbon going into the earth. I want to understand more about that and what are the consequences of that. And then Mani is looking at, creating and more energy efficient combustion engines in order to reduce the amount of carbon that we use. So I think there's a lot that's still to be discussed, and maybe we can just dive a little bit deeper. Mani, I'll get you to start us off again if you don't mind. What possible solutions does your research bring to a circular carbon economy, and what challenges would you face?
So as we say, combustion is ubiquitous in human society. We're using it in mobility, and we just finished 3 days of a low-carbon mobility conference here at KAUST with experts from around the world talking about what technologies can be used to reduce carbon emissions in road-going vehicles, aviation, and marine. And about a third of all carbon is emitted by transportation, and the large majority of this is from road-going vehicles, passenger vehicles and trucks. And many of you know about electric vehicles, electrification. Electrification appears to be a very good solution for reducing carbon emissions from light-duty vehicles. However, the electricity produced to recharge those vehicles still comes from coal-fired power plants, gas-fired power plants in many parts of the world. So the power plant infrastructure also has to be improved, altered, made more efficient, and reducing its carbon emissions. So for light-duty vehicles, there's about 1 billion internal combustion engine vehicles on the road today. And they're not going away tomorrow, and they're not going away in the next 10 years. So for those 1 billion light-duty vehicles, what could we do? We could introduce a low-carbon fuel, a fuel that's made from carbon captured from the environment, from biological sources, or from other point sources of carbon emissions, together with renewable electricity, make a e-fuel, or electronic fuel, we say, electricity-based fuel, and provide that as a drop-in fuel for vehicles. That's one possible solution. It's one that many in Europe, Saudi Arabia, and North America are currently looking at for the existing fleet of vehicles that are out there. Now, for the new fleet of vehicles, you'll have hybrid electric vehicles, ones that have a battery electric motor, as well as an internal combustion engine operating at a very high efficiency. For truck engines, our faculty are working on very high efficiency truck engines. Current engines are about 30–40% efficiency. Of course, the efficiency determines how much carbon emission you emit. We have Professor Bengt Johansen at KAUST, together with Volvo and other truck makers, engine manufacturers, trying to make a 60% efficient engine. And this is also a major target for many in the automotive industry, the 60% target. And then for aviation, really the only solution we have are these types of renewable fuels, low carbon fuels, because it's really challenging to change the power train of a vehicle, of an airplane. You're not going to get it to be highly electric based. You're going to use gas turbine engines. They're going to burn high energy density liquid fuels. So we're working again with Boeing and other types of aviation manufacturers, engine manufacturers like General Electric, to see how they can adopt renewable fuels into their infrastructure. And for the marine sector, we had a lot of discussion today about using low carbon fuels, things like ammonia. Ammonia is a molecule with no carbon. It's just nitrogen and hydrogen, but it can be burned to produce energy. And we work on the fundamental science which enables the combustion of ammonia to occur in engines, also in power plants. So again, from one aspect, from mobility side, we see a third of all carbon emissions could be significantly reduced by adopting better ways of doing transportation, better combustion-based technologies, together with better ways of managing transportation systems. And then we talk about power generation. Power generation will need to become renewable. It will need to become renewable, solar, wind. This will significantly lower carbon emissions, but also those power plants which are currently using combustion-based processes can adopt carbon capture and sequestration. And our objective there as a center is try to innovate what we call oxy-combustion cycles and supercritical carbon dioxide cycles, where we use combustion at a very high pressure and temperature in the presence of oxygen to produce only pure carbon dioxide, which can then be captured and passed on to people like Thomas and Kyle that can use a very pure stream of CO2 either for storage, reuse in the subsurface, or for producing materials and chemicals.
Thank you, Mani. Very, very detailed. Thank you. Thomas, would you maybe like to answer kind of the same question? What solutions does your research offer, circular carbon economy, and what challenges do you face?
Okay.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned before, you can inject carbon into the subsurface and store it there. When you do that, you obviously want to do that for a very long period of time, very, very long, so that it doesn't come back out again, back into the atmosphere. So that process is quite tricky because the subsurface is a very complex environment, and we only understand a little bit of it. And how often do we come to the situation where we say, oh, it's a lot more complex than we initially thought it was? We see that dealing with the subsurface, modeling it and understanding it, we see this on a day-to-day basis. But carbon sequestration, putting the carbon back into the underground, is one of the solutions to take it out. So that's the remove side of things. And when I say it's risky and to understand if it stays there forever, basically, is because, as I mentioned in my introductory sentence earlier, we're disturbing an equilibrium in the subsurface. And in the field that I work in geomechanics, we have to understand to what extent do we disturb the equilibrium of pressure and subsurface stresses, and how does that impact the rock into which we store the carbon, but also the rock that sits above the carbon, because the rock that sits above the carbon has to be a seal, so nothing leaks through it. And again, if we disturb an equilibrium of stress, we can actually cause movements in the subsurface, and we know this catastrophically as earthquakes, but they can be also very small, and even small earthquakes can shift the rocks around so that the gas finds its way. I'm often reminded of Jurassic Park, the first film, when the scientists in their nature always finds its way. And unfortunately, the subsurface is also, because it's so very complex, we do not fully comprehend it. But we can do, and we still have to do a lot of work to mitigate the risks, to remove the risks, to understand the uncertainties, and I think that's a great deal of research that we can do. People obviously are very worried about earthquakes. They have become the forefront of the news pages when it comes to the famous fracking in unconventional reservoirs and in other processes. So there's a great deal of work we have to do to mitigate those risks and better understand how the subsurface works. We've come a long way already in the past, but again, lots needs to be done. So that's the remove part. Now, the petroleum industry has actually already worked with CO2 for a while. They actually inject it into the ground, and funnily enough, they inject it into the ground in order to produce oil better and more efficiently. So they inject CO2 into reservoirs in order to promote the flow of oil to the producing wells already. And in my past career in the industry, I was involved in a project where Saudi Aramco used to do that as a pilot, and it was, to my knowledge, was relatively successful. Then there's a very famous case in the North Sea, the Sleipner field, where the industry already injects CO2 and really sequesters it, and I think they monitor this over time, and they have this under control as well. So those are great examples that it can work, but the volumes are very small. It doesn't scale yet with what we need to put into the ground in order to make a difference environmentally and especially with global warming.
Brilliant, thank you.
So, and then there's the other aspect of actually reusing the CO2 once it was in the surface on the geothermal side, but maybe we'll in the next round.
You can please continue.
Yeah. So on the geothermal side, you can actually take, when you have stored the CO2 out again, and you can use it for power generation. And that would be a really useful thing to do, where you create a cycle of injecting CO2, taking it out and putting it back into the subsurface, and you can generate power from these. There's a lot of technologies are being worked on, researched in and developed, and in our recent conference we had here at KAUST a few weeks ago, we learned a lot about this technology, and it's quite exciting. Companies like Siemens are involved, universities like the ETH in Zurich in Switzerland. And the nice thing is this could really scale up to volumes where we could make a difference with respect to the climate as well. Yeah. And then finally, I just want to say on the geothermal side, we could also use geothermal energy for district cooling and for desalination. And in particular in this part of the region, desalination and cooling are the major carbon users here. And if we do not generate any carbon at all to begin with, then I think we've already achieved quite a bit. Yeah? Yeah. So, and geothermal is also a subsurface process, and so also part of the work that I am doing and my colleagues as well.
Excellent, thank you. A lot of uses for carbon, and we've only touched on 2 of the 3 research areas. Very diverse, though. Kyle, so maybe I'll just pose the exact same question. What possible solutions does your research offer a circular carbon economy? But more importantly, what challenges do you face?
Thanks, Nadia. So when we think about our work, we think about what kind of effect can we have in shifting people's mindset away from maybe a chemical-based solution into a biological-based solution. But to do that, we have to work effectively with local resources. And so the way I look at my work is that we have 4 areas that we work on. We have, the first is bioprospecting, and that's where we go out into nature and we find organisms that naturally do something that is interesting to us. The second is called cell factories, and that's what can those organisms do for us, and can we engineer them? And then once we have the organisms, we do bioprocess design, and that's where we develop the systems to cultivate, say, microalgae or macroalgae or bacteria that can grow on something that we don't want. And then we have to talk about resource use and planning. So not only carbon is required, we need nitrogen, we need phosphorus. Where do we get these things? And so all of those things together come to a point where we can learn more about the organism, but also impact and bring that translation of that science over to society. So in terms of bioprospecting, we're here beside the Red Sea, the beautiful Red Sea, and we have such an immense amount of resource here to go look for new organisms that might have not been developed before. And then microbial cell factories, we do a lot of things where we take a pathway, say, for example, for a medicine or a cosmetic product, and we can take it from another organism, and because of its modular nature, we can drop it in to an organism that's maybe easier to grow or easier to handle. And for example, I brought here some perfume. Some of you have seen this already in my other talks, but this is a perfume that we made by taking a plant enzyme and putting it into an alga, and now that perfume is produced directly from carbon dioxide in a flask with algae instead of being harvested from a natural plant in its wild environment. And so it's this kind of thing that we can do to bring a more sustainable approach to common consumer goods. And so for bioprocess design, we have to work with the local environment. We have to use seawater here instead of making fresh water just to do biotechnology. And then we have to design bioreactors or cultivation strategies that can allow us to grow this at scale. Because if we think about the scale of biology, if we just do kind of some raw back-of-the-envelope calculations, a farmer's field in 1 year will sequester about as much CO2 as a very short, several-hour flight of a plane. And so if we think about that scale, we're pumping out way more carbon into the environment than we can actually deal with biologically. So we're one part of the problem, but we're not going to save the world. And so we have to consider the large scale of where we fit and how we can shift perspectives towards this more biological solution in collaboration with the engineers who can actually work at the scales that will sequester the massive amounts of carbon that we're doing, putting into the environment, excuse me. Yeah.
Thank you. So where do we buy the perfume?
Well, that depends. We have a nice IAF fund to try and scale up this process.
Brilliant.
So in a year, hopefully we'll be able to do that thanks to KAUST.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay, so I think, by the way, all of you in the audience, I'm coming to you very soon, so please do get your questions ready. I just think that we kind of touched on a really nice topic there. Like society itself and this whole circular carbon economy, in terms of how can we make changes. I know that Saudi Arabia, along with 194 other countries, recently signed the Paris Agreement in 2016 to reduce their carbon emissions by 2030. We also know that Saudi Arabia is the biggest producer of oil, and that 1 barrel of oil equals 2 barrels of CO2. Is that what we said? 3? Okay. So, in terms of making changes and making waves, is it, the normal person on the road that can make a difference? Is it the researchers, you guys? Is it the policymakers? Can we talk about this just for a minute? Any of you guys have any comments to make?
So that's one of the main things we're trying to put forward in the G20 this year, as KAUST is involved with the Ministry of Energy in developing this framework of the circular carbon economy. One side is the technologies, right? One side is what technologies can be enabled for reduce, reuse, remove, recycle. How can an environment be created to foster the development of these technologies so that they can be deployed in the right place at the right time? Every part of the world will have a different favorable technology for managing carbon emissions in mobility, power generation, storage, and reuse and recycling, depending on their markets, depending on their social and economic needs. So we do one thing on the technology side, but also it's very important as part of the G20 is also to raise the awareness, right? To raise the awareness in the public that this is something nations are now planning and making it a mandate to target the mitigation of climate change and to develop technology-based solutions, economic-based incentives, all to change human behavior, right? And because human behavior does not change on its own. Yeah? You need economic incentives, you need technological options, and that comes down to what we can do, right? So what we can do from a behavioral perspective is, indeed, we can find the most inefficient use of, say, energy in our own lives, and probably for us at KAUST, it's in the areas of mobility. Probably our largest carbon emissions are coming from air travel and from road travel, and then from domestic heat cooling, yeah? And then you also mentioned that a large emitter was related to the desalination of water.
Yes.
So indeed, reducing the amount of water. So again, in our own lives, we can look at what are the major players, and what can we do to, again, minimize carbon emission by minimizing waste in the utilization of these resources. So I think it's going to play a huge role. Efficiency. When I was at the Atlantic Council meeting in Abu Dhabi last year with some of the world leaders talking about the future of carbon emissions and circular carbon economy, one of the biggest things was behavioral change and optimization of how individuals live on a daily basis in terms of commuting to work, commuting for business long distances, in terms of what types of homes they live in, and this is different types of just simple things you do in your daily life, and technologies and economic incentives we can provide to change the behavior. And this is going to be a big part. And even before these economic incentives, I would say, change your behavior now, because that's going to save you money in the future, right? Because when the incentives come into place, you will get the credits, yeah? If you're able to adapt to a new lifestyle of low carbon, you're the ones who will benefit, because you'll be saving money in the future when there's either taxes or credits given for lowering carbon emissions. So I say consider it like a bank account of your behavior.
Well said. Do you guys have any more comments to
Well,
add to that?
I also agree that behavioral change is important. And if I think of us, maybe we'll feel it because we have more money in the end. But if I think of my kids, I think for the environment and their future, it's really important to set an example and show them how we can live in a way that is more conscious towards the environment and less carbon intensive. Do I need to take that flight? Do I need to go to that meeting? Can I go and do it over Zoom or Skype or something? Can I use my bike to drive to a certain place, or do I need to hop into the car? I mean, those are little small things, but I think they set an example to our peers, but also our children, and I think we should really be conscious about this and do that every day. And we have to remind ourselves, I believe, every single day of these sort of things. Now, on a more larger scale thing, obviously, I'm also happy to hear that many big corporations seem to make decisions now to go to a zero carbon future. We've heard about BP. I think a couple of weeks ago, I think just yesterday or the day before, we heard about Amazon, I think, who are also trying to achieve that. I don't know how this will play out in the future in the end, but at least the people really begin to talk about this, and I think those are really important steps forward in the right direction. But I just want to say what I mentioned earlier with respect to geothermal. I think if we also find ways that help us to not create the carbon in the first place, I think we've already come a long way. So, and we have to work on that and do a lot more research on this as well.
Thank you.
I think we also need to consider ways that we can mitigate existing practices that maybe have some cultural significance, but can be adapted in a way that can reduce their carbon footprint. So common agriculture of animals right now reduces a lot of methane. Yeah. And from feed additives that we can add in, especially things like red algal biomass, we know that we can significantly reduce that methane content up to 50%. And so if we shift our farming practices here in the kingdom, we have a perfect opportunity to do this. We have seawater, we can grow macroalgae, we can export it to the world and influence the mitigation of methane on a global scale. And so this is a very exciting project that we're working on here in my lab. And so it's these kind of thinking that we can also apply to these larger scale. Once you have the industry working together with the mentality of people, you have this critical mass of attitude shift. And I think it takes all of us working together at this stage, and not just in one country, but globally, right? So you can see the diversity of the panel here. We are all from different countries, and we're all at KAUST, where I think we have 112 nationalities working on different aspects of science. And I think this is a model for what we can do and in an influencing role for the world moving forward, especially on the topic of carbon reduction and carbon use and reuse and recycling. Yeah.
Thank you, Kyle. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the audience now. If you have any questions. Oh, we have a very eager one in the back.
I have a general question, I don't know who will volunteer to answer that. So circular carbon economy is a big theme nowadays, especially in the view of the upcoming G20 summit, where it plays an important role in the discussions, being a signature priority of the Saudi presidency. According to circular carbon economy definition, it is a closed-loop model in which emissions are reduced, recycled, or removed for Rs. But if we refer to the physics or thermodynamics, we find the following definition, that a cyclic process is a system whose initial and final states are identical. But if we are talking about circular carbon economy, we can see that emissions are hidden under the ground or in much less extent are reused in the different processes. But they are not placed into the initial state, which are, in our case, petroleum products. So my question is, and I'm a big favor of 4Rs, but I don't understand why we name it circular carbon economy if it is not a circular process. Thank you.
Okay. Mani, I feel like you're the man for this. You can answer this. You got this.
So,
I mean, I cannot argue with Natalya, okay? Natalya is exactly right, okay? This is a nice phrase, okay? But again, we are engineers, we're scientists, we're thermodynamicists. We really know what is a true circularity, right? And as long as we take resources that have been accumulating energy for millions of years, which fossil resources are, we extract them, we convert them, we dissipate that energy to greater entropic forms, then we are always going to be non-circular. So I mean, we cannot argue against the statement, and I cannot justify from a thermodynamic perspective the definition of circular. But again, once you put the word economy into anything, you can use words however you like, right? Because circular carbon economy, it comes from a common, you can say, understanding of circular economies, which have been this definition of circular economy, which was initially pioneered for the utilization of waste resources. So taking waste from a municipality or a city, waste plastics, waste organics, and utilizing those organics either as fertilizer, waste plastics, recycling them, reusing them back into products for the municipality or for the city. So that term of a circular economy was initially pioneered in that sense, and it gave a nice phrase, circular carbon economy, just to raise awareness. I say that's the thing, that's the terminology we should say. It should be, the most important thing is to raise awareness.
Yes.
To raise awareness that things can be done on the reduce, reuse, remove, recycle side. Education plays a key role, and in people to be educated, they need to be aware of the problems, aware of the challenges and how to resolve these challenges. And indeed, ultimately, 50, 60, 70 years from now, my hope is I'm working in the area of combustion. I say by the end of my career, I hope we're not burning anything. That's actually one of my goals. Can we come to that point when I'm 80 years old in the year 2050 where we're not burning anything anymore? We're not taking the oil out of the ground and burning it. We have sustainable sources of energy. And Professor Patzik, who Natalya knows very well, will say that we should use this fossil-based energy as a transition to sustainable energy society, which based completely on renewables. And that's renewable would be totally circular. Still, the challenge exists that you're taking minerals, other materials from the earth. So we have to think in many ways. How do we minimize our interaction with the earth and various types of resources that are there? So it's a challenging question, Natalya. I hope everybody understands that these are important issues. You should be mindful of this, right? Because being mindful of what true circularity is also helps you to mitigate the impact of your activities.
Thank you. I told you you had the answer to that question.
I have to say the word circular to me doesn't sound quite right either, and we have to be really careful how the public interprets this. When I think of carbon, if I want to put carbon into the ground, I want to leave it there. I don't want to necessarily create a cycle where it comes back out. Although I mentioned earlier there are technologies with the geothermal where this could possibly be done, but in the end we want to get the carbon out of the atmosphere and maybe pump it back down and leave it there for a very long period of time. So again, we have to be sure we define circular carbon economy very well, and educating the people what that means is very important in this, because when the public misunderstands something, it can go fire backwards very quickly, unfortunately.
Yes, the name really sells well. Kyle, do you have anything to add? Or?
I mean, we just need to be aware that there are no perfect systems, and what we're dealing with is very complex. The oil that we're burning now is actually old plant matter that's been compressed over long periods of time. It's just that we've been doing it in a linear fashion for the longest time. We've just been releasing it as a waste product. And so I think what at least your work and my work is doing is trying to say, how can we turn that waste product into a value stream? And so that we're not just losing, but rather gaining or capturing some of that value that we're otherwise giving away. And I think it's using the term circular carbon economy is an appropriate metaphor, because we are trying to really divert that linear flow into the atmosphere back into either products or sequestration, but really use it for something as well instead of giving it away. So you're absolutely right. Thermodynamically, there is no justification for it. However, I think it's a very nice mental picture, and it's a very nice way of framing the concepts that we're working towards.
Although economy always wants to see everything go up in a linear way, right? So economy in circular way means is not good news necessarily, right? So again,
good news for this session.
Yes.
Okay, I'm anxious of time. So where's the next question? I know I saw a few hands there.
Okay. Thanks. So I first would like to criticize a little bit this emphasis on individual behavior, because it kind of makes us all feel bad if we don't do enough. But if you actually crunch the numbers, how much can we actually do? So, I mean, KAUST is a perfect experimental situation, because we are like a closed system, well, open system obviously, but like in an island with 6,000 people from all kind of different nationalities, cultural backgrounds. So did any one of you actually calculate ever how much can we reduce the carbon footprint of a KAUST inhabitant just by, buying different things at Tamimi or making one air travel less? I don't think it's that much, because we use all this energy for desalination. We have those terribly inefficient air conditioning systems that are running all the time. And all our energy comes from burning oil, right? So I think the individual, me, you, we cannot do much. I mean, but what we can do is we can try to move the KAUST maybe to innovate in a way, or to try out things that are already established to reduce the impact of KAUST. I think we have to really think on the level of communities, cities, and countries, right? Yeah. And the other thing about the individual behavior is that those G20 that are now touting a circular economy, those are the same, this is the same forum where over the last 20, 30 years, all our world economy was converted into a way that everything we do is regulated by markets. Now, we are completely subject to markets. Free market is kind of the ideology of the 90s that we are still, that is now what governs us. Now, in free markets, you do what is the cheapest thing to do. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. Price regulates everything. So, and 95% of the world population don't have the luxury to make a choice. Like, oh, I buy an electric car. No, I mean, if you're living in India, if you're living in Africa, you don't have the choice to buy a Tesla. Okay, and then most people in the US don't have the choice to buy a Tesla. So, again, this emphasis on individual behavior, I think it's wrong. Really, where we have to get to is that it's cheaper to protect the environment, and it has to be more expensive to pollute. Mm-hmm. But that's a big problem, right? So I think,
absolutely.
Yeah, maybe you can comment.
I just want to say first,
I will have to disagree on the individual behavior, okay? Because
could I just apologize to you, Reich, that you felt that we were, you felt bad because of being an individual. We had this discussion before we actually started today, and we do actually agree that every little counts in some ways, right? We did talk about that just over there at the coffee shop
Well,
earlier.
my view on this is I don't disagree completely. System has to change, indeed. Power generation has to change. An individual cannot change the power generation sector. Policies, frameworks established by the government, incentives provided to industries will change the power generation sector. Similarly, for automobiles, 1 billion road-going vehicles, needs to be different options for low-carbon fuels, for higher efficient technologies, for the consumer to choose from. But individual behavior, I disagree. Individual behavior, I disagree because first I change. Then my family changes. Then my neighbors change. Then my community change. Then the country changes. This is how change happens. Change starts at the individual level. Doesn't matter if you say it's small, it's insignificant. If I never change, nobody else will never ever change. So I disagree completely. Okay, the amount in the whole picture might be small, but it's not insignificant because the intent creates a change in others. And the intent is what matters. And the intent can be small in terms of changing the air travel, the magnitude, but in the end, it will make a difference. So I know we can crunch the numbers. The numbers have been done for KAUST, okay? The numbers have been done. Okay, and then we talk about the market. I agree completely about the economy. G20 actually only started about 12 years ago after the 2008 crash in the financial sector. And it was, again, a market-driven community. And there's many decisions that economists, policymakers make that are wrong, that are incorrect for mitigating the impacts of climate change, for mitigating our impact on the environment. But I believe, we can take advantage as scientists of these forums. Why would we let those economists and those policymakers be ignorant of the real problems that we understand well, right? And we utilize these forums to again, change policy, change the economic mindset of always profits, always growth. Thomas was saying the same thing.
Yeah. And sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you first. No? Okay, sorry.
Typical Canadian,
So,
Kyle.
yeah. Oh, sorry. So just on the note of market, I think it's up to us as well to work with the structures that we have. I mean, we have to do more work to actually make our biological alternatives or our low-carbon alternatives more market-friendly. No one wants to pay more for anything, and you have to reach a level of mass appeal. So it's not up to me to sit in my lab and say, oh, look at me, I'm pipetting this, and oh, look, I made a fluorescent algae or something. It's up to me as somebody who can see that, that value that nature has evolved for us to interact with as many people as possible to try and convince them to be engaged with the process of making this process cheaper. So yes, it's going to be expensive to change a system. Yes, we're going to have to build different farms to grow these things. We're going to have to build different infrastructures. And it's not like we can say, oh, it's just like farming. Farming has had 10,000 years to figure out how to run a tractor through a field. But we, as growing algae in a field, have only had maybe 20 or 30 years, right? So we need more engagement. We need a critical mass of people focused on these topics to bring those that tangential or that tangible value to common people who may not want to read a large label as to why this product is better for the environment, or may not want to do all of that research. They just want to live their life. But we can try and change that system so it's more sustainable for them.
Thomas, did you have something to add?
Well, I mean, I also agree on what Mani said on the individual side. I think we as individuals need to start, and hopefully it will grow into a big movement. So that's all I wanted to say in that respect. The Tesla is not necessarily the answer of it either, because manufacturing that also is very carbon intensive. And then the other thing I wanted to say, so I mentioned geothermal many times. Someone recently calculated how much it costs to the same energy that you get from geothermal versus 1 million cubic feet of gas that you produce from a hydrofracked well, and it turns out these costs are roughly the same. So the industry obviously right now wants to go with what they know best, and this is go produce gas and hydrofrack those wells. We have to come down with costs, and this is a policy issue, and I think, I hope in governments there will be serious changes in terms of policy that will then also further induce behavioral changes for the individuals and the societies.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we do appreciate those type of comments, right? This is what we were looking for, to spark this type of debate, and
Yes.
really, really important. And
Definitely.
I mean, this here, right here, is just a snapshot of KAUST capabilities. I mean, there are KAUST faculty working on more energy efficient desalination technologies, more energy efficient AC technologies as well. So those things are ongoing. Us as human beings can turn off the lights. We can get better washing machines. We can put our laundry on in the evenings instead, and we can do those tiny little things just to help. Why not? For, as Thomas said, his kids, the future. So look, I'm afraid that's all that we have time for today. We can't have any more questions, but you can actually come up and ask the KAUST faculty questions after we finish. I just want to thank you as the audience for your participation today, for sitting here and giving us your time and listening to us all. And also, I think we should give a big round of applause to the KAUST faculty for giving us their time. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Naadiya. Thank you again, panelists.